Hi there. I want to welcome you back to Living on Purpose. I'm Dr. Allison Brumley, a naturopathic physician, and I'm here with my co-host Karen Cox, who's a health and wellness coach. And our last episode, we talked about how to create some healthy habits. And this time we're going to focus on that food portion, really talking about the mindset of intuitive eating, how to really eat with your body and your body's wisdom. How do you start with a conversation about that?
Well, when we're working with somebody to make some lifestyle changes, we're really helping them tune into what they're feeling emotionally, what they're feeling in their body, learning to listen to their body cues. When we talk about exercise, we're wanting them to pay attention to how their body feels with the exercise they're doing. And maybe when we work into the food, it's like, what do you feel like your body's missing that would help you perform better? Mm-hmm. And so it's paying attention to the cues the body is giving us.
Yeah, so starting with just the hunger sensation. Figuring out what is the hunger about. Is it really that you've gone 4 or 5 hours without eating and you're really hungry? Or is it more about you're tired, you're unhappy? We eat for those reasons. And whether it's fully, like people will say all the time, I'm an emotional eater. Mm-hmm. But then usually emotional eating is food that we inherently think of as bad. Chips, candy, those kinds of things that we more emotionally eat. Or you grew up, with your parents saying, eat all the food on your plate. And so that's become a habit where how could you leave food on your plate even if you're not still hungry?
Mm-hmm. And one of the things when I'm working with somebody who does eat emotionally and tends to choose the chips or the sugar or something, I have them start with gratitude because they could be choosing something different to feed that emotional emptiness. And even though sugar isn't the best for us, or chips, or the thing that the food they're reaching for, it's actually probably better than other substances or other worse habits. Mm-hmm. And so I have them start with gratitude and then move on from there, and to discover what it is they're actually trying to feed with that more harmful food.
That's so good. And then you really think about that intuitive part of that you can develop over time once you have an understanding of what that means. The whole premise of intuitive eating really is a mindset. And sometimes they'll talk about not thinking about diets. That diet, I mentioned it already in the last segment, but that it has that negative connotation. So even people now, where the big thing lately has been either the eating according to macros. Mm-hmm. People will say, they won't say I'm on the macro diet. They'll say I'm eating macros. So if you can change the mindset of I'm eating for nutrition, I'm eating to feed my body and soul, and just get out of any of that negative connotation of that food is either inherently good or bad. Mm-hmm. There are foods that are healthy and unhealthy, but our body doesn't have such a striking resistance to the healthy, unhealthy as just thinking something's good, something's bad.
Right, and I liked how we've mentioned before, we really, when we put food into our bodies, we're really striving to nourish the body on a cellular level so that it can make new healthy cells. And so when we think about food choices and thinking intuitively, if we can start with, what am I doing today to nourish my body with food?
Mm-hmm. And that can look a little different for some than it does for others. Sometimes you can think about eating for your blood type. Or I think you mention Ayurvedic medicine sometimes, and you've got the 3 doshas in that. In Chinese medicine, it's really more about eating for the season, So I like that. What do you say about seasonal eating?
Well, it's like listening to your body, because our bodies do intuitively change with the season. So in the fall, when it starts to get cooler, we tend to want more soups, and soups with root vegetables and things that feel more grounding. If you think of a root vegetable, it's deep into the ground, and so it's very grounding. In wintertime, we tend to want to be a little bit more heavier with our eating because it provides more warmth for the body. And then in the spring, we tend to want to lighten up. And so the salads, the greens, the fresh things start to be a little bit more appealing, where in the winter it's like it's hard to get a salad in sometimes because we want warmth. And so it's that type of listening to your body. What is my body really feeling like it needs? Like in the wintertime, sometimes we really are drawn to citrus, which is giving us a lot of vitamin C to maybe fight the flu season. And, in the spring, we want berries. And so it's just listening. Our body kind of intuitively makes those changes to get different things into our diet.
Yeah, so even just becoming aware of what foods grow in that season that our body would resonate with and help our bodies function a little better through that season can be really helpful. And another issue can be, how much do I eat? I've mentioned in previous episodes that the story of the book Why French Women Don't Get Fat, which is all about portion control, or thinking about in Chinese medicine that the stomach only likes to be 80% full. And so many times we overeat because we don't listen to that cue of this is enough. And there's a book. Just like French Women Don't Get Fat is an older book. Switch is a great book on how to make lasting changes. I feel like I learned a lot from that. And at the beginning of that book, the author gives a story of where they were doing some experiments, and some people, they're going to the movies. Some people got the big jumbo popcorn. Others got the little popcorn. And they asked questions about, were you hungry? Then did you get full? Asking about, and some about motivation even too. But over and over with any kind of experiment they did about that, if you were given a larger portion, you ate a larger portion. So that if you have this tendency to overeat, you're better off getting a small bowl, getting a small plate, and then feeling it. And there's something about the brain that you will be more full on a small plate that looks like it's got more food on it versus a large plate that's got what looks like a little bit of food on it. So that can be one really helpful trick is to do that. I don't typically overeat sugar, but my trick is that I have just these little bowls, and if I want any of those true fruit, they're so good. I will put 4 or 5 in that bowl rather than if you have the whole bag, you just have a tendency to just keep eating and eating and eating.
I like that. Another trick is sitting to eat versus standing or eating on the go. We tend to, when we sit, we're paying more of attention to our meal. Maybe we're having a little bit more enjoyment with our meal because we're sitting. And then taking some deep breaths instead of like gulp, gulp, gulp. Taking some deep breaths, chewing a little, it helps to trigger that hunger response to, oh, I am full. I am done eating now because I've slowed down.
Yeah, even thinking about food hygiene, which is, chewing your food well, slowing down, which is so much harder in the United States than it is in European countries. They are used to having meals together, sitting and eating, whereas you look at any movie in America and everybody's just grabbing a coffee and a donut in the morning, a hot dog in the for lunch, and on the go. You're walking while you're eating. And so then you've got this little tug of war between that sympathetic nervous system, the parasympathetic nervous system, and you want to be in that parasympathetic rest and digest, which is the sitting, the enjoyment if you're eating with someone and having a conversation. All helps with that intuitive eating. You have a tendency to not overeat.
Yeah, and maybe let's next talk about the emotional eating with that on the go, rush, being in the fight and flight.
I like the idea of honoring your hunger. If you are hungry, then you are hungry. And the way to help really take the emotion out of that is, I think it goes back to what you always go back to, and that's your why. And why are you eating, and really having an understanding of that. There's therapy that some people can do for that. And sometimes a little counseling can be helpful to open up that mindset of why do I do this? But also journaling. Sometimes you can come up with your own reasons of why. And as I mentioned, sugar being a big one. It's if you're tired, if you're sad and unhappy, if your blood sugars are low, you have a gravitation more to those higher sugary foods because they give you energy momentarily. There's a dark side to that though. And it can boost your serotonin. If your blood sugars are low, it gives you that blood sugar hype.
You get some sugar in your brain.
So there can be a number of reasons for that emotional eating, but figuring out your why, I think it could go back to that. And the more you understand about yourself, you honor the hunger, but you also, as you're making some changes in those behaviors, that you have things on hand that will fill that gap.
And that's, I talked a little bit in the beginning of, I have people start with gratitude and be grateful that maybe they chose the sugar or the salty to help feed it, but then dive deep into that. Oftentimes when we're picking sugar a lot, we're missing maybe some sweetness in life, and that helps fulfill it. So one of the things in integrative medicine and nutrition that I have learned are primary foods versus secondary foods. And secondary food is actually what we eat and put in our body. It's actually secondary to what really feeds us. And as I've researched and learned more about this, it's so true. So if you think about when you were a kid and you were out playing with your friends and your mom called you into dinner, you didn't really want to come to dinner because playing was feeding you. It's like you had no desire for the secondary food at that time because what was really feeding your soul was playing. If you think about creativity, if you're an artist and you're in the moment of creating, that's what's feeding your soul. So you probably don't go in and you probably forget about the secondary food for a while, because that's really what's feeding you. So when we have people that we're working with that tend to go to food to feed them, we have them do a circle of life wheel that has all of these primary foods places: joy, creativity, exercise. Exercise is really a primary food. Relationships, spirituality. And we have them see where they're low. And then we have them start putting that into their life more to feed them. And then the intuitive for secondary food actually becomes more natural. like really listening, oh, I really am hungry. My body does need some secondary food to keep going, but I've really fed my soul well with the primary food.
Yeah, I like that a lot. I don't know that I've thought about that concept, so that was great. Next, I think about how filling things are, and not just filling, but fulfilling, and that kind of goes back to that pleasure. With all the different foods to eat. I just think people can get so confused as to what's the best for me. An example of that is, say I have somebody who comes in with an irritable bowel syndrome or SIBO. Both of those are so incredibly common. And I'll say, well, it'd be really good to do a low FODMAP diet. That low FODMAP diet is good for those people. They have less bloating, less symptoms, and so that nutritional plan is not going to be good for everybody because there's quite a bit of restriction in it, and I don't always like restrictions. But for that, until you can heal that SIBO or that irritable bowel and really get it under control, being on the low FODMAP diet can be a very good thing. But as we go through the lists of foods that are good, foods that are just kind of intermediate, they may or may not bother you, and foods to avoid, I will always say, if you eat the food on the avoid list and you feel good on it, eat it. If there's a food on the good list in the green and you don't feel good on it, don't eat it. So there is a certain aspect of, after you eat, just make note. Do I have a stomach ache? Do I have to run to the bathroom? Do I feel bloated? Do I have heartburn? And then you'll know that, okay, that I didn't digest that well. That was not good for me. So sometimes it's a little experiment on your own to decide, what was it in that meal that really affected me?
It's learning to be your own scientist. We do that a lot with, we want people to go a period of time between meals so that their body has time to digest. And so oftentimes eating enough protein helps you get to the 3-4 hours later. And if you find that you have breakfast but you're hungry by 10, you probably didn't have enough protein for breakfast to get you to noon. So those are some things to pay attention to as well. Is what I'm eating, the amounts that I'm eating, enough to get me to the next meal? So
yeah, that's so true. In the digestive system, you have what's called the migrating motor complex, and it works better, and that's the nervous system. That's what creates that peristalsis through the system, through those intestines. And if you are constantly grazing and always eating all day and never give that migrating motor complex a rest, it breaks. There's something about eating breakfast, lunch, and dinner. Right now, lots of people are intermittent fasting, and even that's fine. If you do well on that, there are some advantages to that. So maybe you eat more of a brunch, a snack, and a dinner. I still like, eating multiple times a day. It doesn't cause so much stress on your adrenal glands. I think we mentioned that in the adrenal segment. But I think if people can get away from grazing too, if that's your habit, then that would be a good one to say, okay, I'm going to change this so I'm not grazing all day. I'll eat breakfast, lunch, dinner. If you need a snack, that's fine too. But it does help the whole digestive process.
yeah, and so it just gets back to the listening to the body. That's what intuitive means, is learning to tune in and listen to what your body is actually needing.
Yeah, and sometimes you think, well, my body's really asking for sugar. I really want the sugar, because it's usually something else that's screaming that. Sometimes people can have an overgrowth of yeast, and the yeast needs sugar, and so they're saying, "Feed me, feed me." So there can be some challenges with that.
And it's like we really need to practice some self-compassion as we learn about our bodies, learn how to heal our bodies, and learn what our bodies need. And it's okay when we say we need that sugar, or we need those, we feel like we need the sugar, or we feel like we need that, then to keep practicing self-compassion as we learn more about our bodies.
There are some other tricks that I've read some research on, that if you use more spice in your food, you're less likely to be hungry sooner. It's more satisfying. So it's whether you put chives on your potato or parsley in your salad, or, not everybody likes parsley, but it is one of those that is so flavorful, helps with digestion, helps with hormonal balance. Using turmeric, which is very anti-inflammatory. You can sprinkle just a little turmeric over eggs, and then you putting cilantro. Any Mexican food, put a lot of cilantro on it. Cumin, though, both of those are so good. But the more spice you eat, the more satisfying people are, according to that research. And besides the fact that those herbs and spices are so incredibly healthy, they've got so many antioxidants in them. You hope vitamins and minerals, although we do know our soils are depleted, but I still think that they are abundant in healthy chemicals for us.
It gets back to that concept of making sure it's an enjoyable event, that we're enjoying the process of nourishing our bodies by giving them a little more flavor. Because if we think about the fast food, the food on the go, it's really not that flavorful. So we're just chunking it down to get the calories, to get the energy to move on our day. But if we're sitting and we're really paying attention to the flavors, enjoying the company that we're with, then we're more likely to be done with it and move on and have had a nourishing experience with our food.
I think the key is really just whatever you need to create that healthy relationship with food. And if you're rewiring that food is nourishing for my body. I eat nourishing food 80 to 90% of the time. Again, not striving for perfection, but being better. And then as you create that better, you can just keep getting better and better.
And it fuels your desire to be more intentional with your diet, with the nourishing foods that you're putting into your day today.
Yeah, and even all of this can be regardless of your why. Is it to lose weight? You want to lose weight. Well, to think about dieting for weight loss is miserable for the majority of people. And so if you can just maintain that I eat for nourishment. If you're celiac or gluten sensitive, you don't eat gluten. If you're sensitive to dairy, every time you eat dairy, you get this nasal congestion, red cheeks, sinus pressure, headache, and dairy can also cause some constipation. If you notice that, after I eat dairy, I get this nasal congestion, it's a really good thing to not eat dairy. And then that doesn't even have to be perfect. A lot of people do really well on the sheep cheese, like your feta pecorino cheeses. They don't affect people as much as the cow's dairy type of dairy. If you eat eggs and then get a stomach ache, just pay attention.
Yeah. Our bodies are pretty amazing. They give us really good feedback.
Dr. Perlmutter wrote a book called No Grain, No Pain. And as I've taken people off grains, even if it's not forever, they have less pain. Then they are less likely to want to eat grains. And grains have some nutrients for us. I don't really like, I don't really like the restriction of that. But sometimes it's a really good way to get people out of that cycle of inflammation is don't eat grains, don't eat sugar. Get out of that cycle of inflammation, heal up the gut, heal up the hormones, and then go back to reintroducing some of those. And sometimes your body will tolerate them much better if you've taken a little break, healed things up, and then try and go back to it. So Karen, what do you think would be the best challenge for our listeners this week?
So I think a good place for our listeners to start is paying attention to those primary foods. See where maybe you're lacking. Maybe it's you need to make a stronger relationship, or get creative, be more playful, and choose one and see if that helps you with your intuitive eating, that you're getting better nutrition in because you're fulfilling your life in your primary food choices. So like and subscribe. Let us know how you're doing with this challenge, because we're very interested in your feedback and your comments. And live on purpose this coming week, and we'll talk to you next week.